Hello, everyone who is joining us live here. If you have joined us for a Nonprofit Excellence Series presentation or a webinar from United Way, you might recognize me. I am Morgan Vanek. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Nonprofit Excellence here at United Way. And I'm very excited to be welcoming you all to our How You Can Help webinar about volunteerism in Larimer County. We've got a very exciting panel lined up for you. But before we get started, I just want to share my screen for a moment and go through a couple of technical instructions for you. So when you are interacting with the panelists, we would love for you to use the Q&A box to ask your questions, not the chat box. We are very happy to try to monitor the chat box, but that Q&A box makes sure that you are not going to lose your question in the chat as things start to get scrolling. There is an option to ask questions anonymously if that makes you feel more comfortable. You're also able to like questions and move them kind of up to the top of the list so that folks who have the same question, make sure we get those answered first. And you can also comment on other questions if there's anything that you would like to add. And so I'm going to stop screen sharing now. Please feel free to get in contact with us in the chat if you struggle or have any questions about the technical side of things. But for now, I will go ahead and introduce my colleague, Kylie Hipschman. Go ahead and kick things off, Kylie.
Hi there. Thank you so much, Morgan. So as Morgan said, my name is Kylie Hipschman. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm really excited to invite you all to this panel, whether you are attending live or whether you will be watching virtually after this event. Today, we are really grateful to have a diverse community of panelists today, providing the nonprofit, corporate, and volunteer experience to speak more to current needs about current volunteer needs in Larimer County today. Here at United Way of Larimer County, we really appreciate our position in the community to bring together companies and nonprofits and community members to address local needs. And particularly this month, as it is National Volunteer Month, we've consistently heard from our nonprofit partners that they so appreciate their volunteers, and yet it can be really hard to recruit volunteers, particularly volunteers who are able to show up and volunteer on a regular basis, developing relationships with clients and developing relationships with nonprofits. At the same time, we also pretty regularly hear from corporate partners and businesses in our community that they are so excited to give back and volunteer, but it's hard, and it's hard to know how to volunteer and what to do. And so that's in part what brings us here today. And so with that, I'd love to give our panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, and we'll go ahead and get started. I'll start with you, Joe.
Thanks, Kylie. Hi, everyone. I'm Joe Clifton. I work with Fidelity Investments in Fort Collins. But I'm here today because I volunteer for CASA of Larimer County. For those of you that don't know, CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates.
Blake.
Hi, my name is Blake Barkowski. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for CASA of Larimer County, and Joe did a great job of just kind of introducing what we do. CASA actually has been around for over 30 years, and our mission is to provide a safe and permanent outcome for children who are facing abuse and neglect through the court system. So we appreciate everyone tuning in today.
Thank you, Blake. Kimberly?
Hi, I'm Kimberly with the Food Bank for Larimer County. I am the volunteer coordinator here, and basically we provide food to those facing hunger all across Larimer County. So that covers Loveland, Fort Collins, all of Larimer County. So it's a true honor. It's an awesome place.
Thank you, Kimberly. JR.
Hi, my name's Jamie, and I also go by JR. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am with the BIPOC Alliance of Larimer County. And our programming, I'm the program director, and we serve the BIPOC community in Larimer County. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color, and our programming is rooted in joy and liberation for our BIPOC community, and we heavily rely on our volunteer support across the community.
Thank you, JR. And Courtney.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Courtney Leeson-Hope. I'm with the OtterCares Foundation, which is a charitable foundation of OtterBox or Otter products here in Fort Collins. Many of you have our OtterBox or life-proof phone cases or our tumblers from the Otter shop. I'm proud to be the Community and Employee Engagement Manager, which I have the humble privilege of connecting our Otter Products employees to volunteer opportunities with all of our nonprofits here in Northern Colorado and across the US. We have about 1,000 plus employees across the US. So we have paid volunteer program, which I'll speak about today, and I'm excited to share more.
Great, thank you so much, Courtney. And so to start off, I'll direct this to our nonprofit partners. However, Joe and Courtney, you both are welcome to chime in here. You know, I'd love to hear a little bit more from you all about the state of volunteerism in Larimer County. What have you observed, whether that be as a community member or somebody at a local nonprofit? And how has COVID-19 impacted your volunteer base?
Well, I'll kick things off. A part of our organization, we rely heavily on volunteers. In fact, they do the majority of the lift for CASA. As Joe mentioned, as cases move through the dependency and neglect court system, they are appointed by a judge, these volunteers, to stay with a case through its duration. And so it's a heavy lift that we ask our volunteers. During COVID, during the pandemic, especially the early stages, you know, we had to pivot like so many of the organizations and kind of figure out how does this exist in a virtual world. At that time, the court system was, you know, shut down or in the virtual mode. And so we were pivoting that. At the same time, we recognized that our volunteers had their own stressors. They were dealing with the pandemic just as much as everyone was. So there was job insecurity. There was children at home that needed to be educated or just supervised. And so all those stressors, we really saw our attrition rate from when they went from training to accepting cases. We saw that shrink significantly. And so, and of course, that impacted our ability to provide those services to the children and the families that we serve. And so, you know, as we started to get more comfortable in the virtual environment, we were able to kind of punt on that end. And now that we've kind of re-engaged and are back to in-person training, back to in-person court, back to those gatherings with our CASA volunteers and their children assigned in their cases in person, you know, we've seen, you know, things kind of resume back, but we've also witnessed a 37% increase in our county in report in case filings for dependency and neglect. So not only are we kind of recouping from losing some of those volunteers during the COVID time, but now our need is even more significant as more cases are in the system and we're being asked to step up. So that's kind of where we are. We're fortunate that our community and kind of like the food bank, I mean, we serve all of Larimer County and even Jackson County as well. I think it's a very philanthropic, hands-on community. I think the community takes their role in ensuring, you know, vulnerable populations are served very seriously and are very generous with their time and resources. So we're grateful for that. But again, as that need just continues to increase, we are, you know, having to get creative and you know, in our requests to get people involved.
Absolutely. Thank you, Blake. We'll go to JR next and then Courtney.
Thanks. For the BIPOC Alliance, we are a community-led organization, and we're founded in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd, and we're primarily run by volunteers. And so we've been a primarily volunteer-run organization since our inception, with myself as one of the only staff members currently as a program director. We heavily rely on our volunteers to not only be our allies in our mission moving forward in our community, but also to help us achieve pretty much all of our goals and aspirations. We are so grateful to have a solidarity team of individuals that support our day-to-day work, from grant writing to evaluating to research to tracking city council meetings and reading city budget documents so that we can report on them. Our volunteers are our lifeblood, really, to help move our mission forward and to be able to continue to engage and collaborate with our community across lines. In terms of the pandemic, we started in the pandemic. And so for me, I started as a volunteer as well. And everyone that I met was only through a computer. And so it was about a year until I met people in real life, and which was like really incredible experience to be able to engage with everyone after, you know, several years, like a year or so of really hard work, really emotional work and collaboration at a distance. So super grateful for the volunteer support we've had. And we have a regularly standing meeting every week with our solidarity team who continues to advocate for us regularly. And we also have recently launched a Slack channel to develop a solidarity network of volunteers. So we are able to engage with folks in the moment or when we need to. So that's a little bit of background on our volunteer space.
Thanks, JR. Courtney?
Yeah, I love this question. You know, as sort of the supplier of volunteers, it was a really interesting experience to see a group like, you know, Blake mentioned, that is so motivated and so engaged with the community, you know, experiencing the same things, you know, alongside of coworkers and community members. Just like everywhere else, you know, we did see a pretty significant decrease in participation for a while, but kind of when we got our, you know, our feet underneath us, we were able to recognize that there was outdoor opportunities, there were virtual opportunities where skill sets could be put to use, or even organizations on a regular basis like the Smithsonian Institute that is always looking for individuals to help build records and all of these other things. So I have a good list of those projects if anyone's interested and has groups of volunteers that are looking for things they can do from their computer. I think the positive side though that we saw, and I'm sure many of you saw, was it really opened our eyes as community members, as neighbors, to the realities of life, especially when life is not providing you that consistent paycheck or your childcare, or the ability to be away from a home that may not be a safe environment for the majority of the day. So I think we're seeing in our employees a renewed sense of understanding, empathy, and a desire to give back. And so we have definitely seen an uptick in volunteering, both virtually and in person. And I'm working really hard to put as many opportunities in front of our employees as possible, because we really believe in connecting that unique individual to opportunities that can be transformative for them and as well as the organization. That being said, people are still busy, and I think being home and not being present has actually really affected participation just in the top of mind. You get out of habit, and once you're out of habit, it gets out of your schedule. So we're working really hard to bring that back and using it as a restorative opportunity, a time to step away as an individual or with your team and give back. So lots of work to be done, but excited to really kind of be back in the full swing, but still seeing some need in getting people out and about with their schedules. So.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney. And I really appreciate what you said about how, you know, sometimes when things get out of, you know, we're out of habit, right? We're out of routine. It can be hard to get back into that routine and rebuild volunteering into our schedule, which is part of what brings us here today. Kimberly, feel free to chime in.
Thank you. I definitely will be an echo to Blake and JR and Courtney. The things that they said just are hit right on for us as well. We ended up losing 65% of our volunteer base when COVID hit, because most of our volunteers were 55 and older, so they were in that critical population. And of course, there's a great deal of fear with COVID, and yet our client load increased by 3 times. So we had this dramatic drop in our support, and then this huge request for need. And something we've learned when working with other food banks, like Food Bank of the Rockies, their name is known really well in Denver, versus we realized we had to kind of expand our name brand better in this area. How many people don't even realize there's a food bank in this community, or that it's all us. When you have different sites, we have our 4 different locations, that's still us. But the good thing is about COVID is that it made us think outside the box. We had to get creative in figuring out new recruitment channels, like reaching out to schools, organizations that may not have their employees working all together in person. loved the idea of sending their employees to our site to help out where we had everything socially distanced, and then their employees could actually see each other for the first time in that year. So that was kind of a great way. And then seeing the results of the volunteers, how many of them needed that human interaction, and the fact we had to stay open to serve people that needed food. It's amazing to see how many people on the mental health aspect, at how much it filled them up or helped them survive their own challenges they were facing. COVID has hit everyone. Probably everyone knows someone that has lost someone. So all of our volunteers, our staff, probably lost at least 3 people during COVID. And so they had their own challenges to face, but when they could come here and help people that didn't know where their next meal would be coming from, it helped them manage their own grief and their own stress by being able to do something positive in the world. So this community is amazing. The fact that we had a 3 times higher request that we ever had for turkeys during our torta turkey season, and yet the community met it. We had no idea how we were going to do it, and the community stepped up and did it. And so this is such a wonderful place, which I'm so glad my children get to be a part of this and be around people that care about their community while seeing the fruits of what happens when you care about your community. What a great place to be in. So very blessed we're here. It's a great place.
Absolutely, Kimberly. And what you were sharing made me think of a comment that we just got from Veronica, who said, it seems like many systems are overwhelmed and understaffed, and there are many people slipping through the cracks. The pandemic has made issues of mental health, homelessness, and domestic violence more prevalent. Right. And so I love what you shared, Kimberly, about how, yes, all of these things, and amidst all of this, we have seen our community step up and give back. And that kind of leads me to Joe. I'm going to put you on the spot here, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about your experience, Joe, getting involved with CASA and becoming a CASA in the middle of COVID and continuing to invest in that program and in that community today.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of different things come to mind there. One is I was onboarding with CASA throughout the pandemic, which involves about 40 hours of training. And then after that, more training. So it was a little difficult because most of that had to be done online. And what could be done in person was the new normal with masks and everything. So that kind of put a challenge on your ability to connect with the trainers and connect with the other volunteers that were going through it. Fortunately, things are starting to look better, at least for now. So a couple weekends ago, I was able to do a training in person. I could see everybody, nobody had masks on, and it was nice to be able to connect that way. There has been a positive that I can think of as well, though, that the pandemic has brought, and that is the case that I'm assigned to for CASA. I work with a team of individuals that support my child. It includes therapists, directors, school deans, vice principals, myself, caseworkers, and so on. And now that Zoom and Teams virtual meetings are the new normal, it makes it really easy for all of us to connect anytime and even when emergencies are occurring. So I imagine that will be the new normal going forward, and something that I do see as a positive.
Absolutely. So in some ways, the pandemic has forced us to shift, but in that shift, it can make certain aspects of volunteering easier to connect, easier to get together. And so that leads me to my second question to our awesome team here. And that question is, how does volunteerism strengthen our community? So from the nonprofit perspective, that can be speaking to how volunteerism strengthens your ability to serve. That can also be from the volunteer corporate perspective. How does volunteerism strengthen networks, strengthen relationships, help everybody give back? And it looks like, Courtney, you've got your hand up. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. I think I can build off a little bit I was saying about awareness. I think unless you're really out and about in your community, you're connecting with all the different facets and challenges and opportunities of what's facing our community, and allowing for growth and equity, you aren't really aware of what you can do to make a change, right? And so at Otter, we really view giving back as one of our core values. So our company mission is we grow to give. We give financially through grants through the OtterCares Foundation, but giving back is completely about using your time, talent, treasure, or testimony to create a change. And we really focus in, as I mentioned, on that transformational experience that happens when your eyes are open, you're connected in real time to someone's mission, to a challenge, to a recipient of services. And you see oftentimes they're your neighbor or just like you, and you start to think, maybe I'm not so different than someone else, or maybe there are things that I can do to make a small difference. And I think that is the only thing that can happen when you have volunteers out in the community. And without that, we don't have a connected community. We can't create systemic change. We can't lift up these incredible people. And I started on the nonprofit side. So, running a team, a lean team with a huge mission to do what Kimberly's team, like I said in the chat, did during the pandemic, and so many, and JR's team and others, is a big deal. And it takes a lot of work. And these are the people that were in pain, just like all of us, but they're setting that aside to serve others. And so to me, it's just really an opportunity for individual growth, individual, awareness, but collective change. And I think that the more individuals understand how nonprofits work, how they lean into donations, how they lean into time, and they really can transform challenges with the help of others, I think it really creates a movement. So we're really just excited and proud to be able to be part of that. And I think it's so important.
Absolutely. Kimberly?
Well, first, thank you, Courtney. That is just a huge, reading what you wrote, that's just so kind of you to say, and that means the world to us. We're very passionate about our mission, and that's one reason why we love when people can come volunteer, because it's amazing how many people have ideas in their head. Like, Larimer County, it can look like a very affluent area, and people are shocked at the idea that there's hunger here. 1 in 6 children face hunger in the US, but in Larimer County, it's over 1 in 3. And many people are stunned by that. And then it's amazing how sometimes also people may have stigmas in their mind or expectations of who they think faces hunger. And then when they're actually here and present, and when they see our clients, then they start to understand, oh, these are working families, or these are seniors on limited incomes, and just start to understand more. Or we do a survey, we do an annual survey, and I added a question this year to our survey because I wanted to hear our volunteers' personal stories, because I know each one of them have had unique experiences and reasons why they keep coming back. And one of them, the volunteer was helping with the kids cafe, which is something that's about to go this summer. It always picks up when school's out, but the kids cafe feeding program. And she said, when I watched a child shove food in their mouth so quickly and was so grateful for whatever I handed them, after I've fought with my own children that could be really picky, she said, that really showed me what hunger is. And I had to see it firsthand in person. And I think the more we've been engaging these younger organizations, these younger groups, schools and high schools, to see kids see other kids facing hunger, it starts to make things click, so that as they get older, they already see that there's an issue, there's a need there's something happening, and makes them more conscientious. And I think that just enriches our community the more we're involved and aware. So yeah, so thank you so much, like Courtney, for all the ways that all the things you do to send people our way to help us. Otter has definitely been one of the ones that has kept us alive and surviving through COVID. So we couldn't do it without all of you. We're just so grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And thank you. I appreciate what both you and Courtney highlighted, and I'd imagine some of our other panel participants feel this as well, that volunteerism, right, is one piece of the puzzle. And that as we volunteer and we build that connection to the cause and to the agency, it can also help us mobilize to support larger systems change and to get involved in other aspects of our community that can help increase access to housing or increase access to equitable opportunities in the school system, and address access to food and food security in our community. I think we've got Blake next.
I think everyone's done a great job of just kind of presenting this big picture of volunteering in our community, and groups like Courtney's group and OtterBox employees that come in and do these day of service events, and some of them may get connected more on a more intimate level or increase their involvement long term. So being able to fill these opportunities where there's maybe short-term assignments that people can kind of get a sample of what the organization does and what their mission is, but then also knowing, like you said, those systemic changes come from the hours and hours that our CASA advocates put in every month. We average 10 to 15 hours a month for each of these CASA volunteers, that they're building those relationships with the community and that sort of thing, and building that communication with the child that they're serving. And so and again, it goes back to that COVID pandemic question about people are just looking for that sense of connection. And we find that our volunteers, they provide that sense of connection to those children, the children that they're serving, feel valued. They have this stable, consistent adult presence in their lives that they may not see, when they're in the court system, but also too with just those adult case people, that the adults on the case may change frequently, and that CASA volunteer provides that continuity and that sense of value, and that they're seen and heard. And I think at the end of the day, that's what everyone wants, is to be seen and heard and valued. And so, some people, to be able to find that in a philanthropic sense and to be able to give back to your community and feel that value from that aspect, but then also on the flip side of instilling that sense of value for others through your service. I just think it's a remarkable thing for our community to experience.
Thank you, Blake. JR.
Yeah, I've loved everything everyone has shared, and I wanted to add on to the aspect of community building in terms of volunteerism. So as a community-led organization that was rooted in solely volunteers to begin with, it did create this really beautiful connection and community, a sense of community that is multiracial and really diverse, which I think is what a lot of folks in the community were looking for, regardless of race and identity. Just a way to be able to connect with others, to provide help, to learn more, to embrace cultures and diverse cultures and perspectives. And so throughout our existence, our volunteer base has stayed relatively consistent, with a lot of the same people supporting our work day to day or week to week, solely because we are focusing on building that sense of community and ingraining every volunteer into the day-to-day work that we do, so that they feel, pretty much all of our volunteers know exactly what we're doing almost every day, probably weekly, only because it is like a weekly meeting we'll have. So I can't necessarily tell everyone every day what I've done. So I think, a lot of our work is rooted in joy and providing that sense of liberation, not only for people of color, but for everyone in our community who's experienced a sense of trauma, which is all of us after COVID for the most part. So the ability to gather around joyful moments, it has been incredible. And we've been able to bring some in-person events back, and that's where we do have some volunteers that show up, but the good news is that they've already been involved in everything we've been doing. So they want to be there as part of the community, as well as being a volunteer at the same time. It's been really incredible to see how volunteers really show up to make the change we wish to see, right? Like to use that quote.
Absolutely. Anything else to our panelists before we move on to our next question? Nope. All right. So my next question is, what is the difference between volunteering in maybe I would say specific volunteer events or initiatives versus volunteering on a regular basis. You know, what do you all as organizations, as volunteers, as employers in our community really experience when volunteers are able to develop those strong relationships and give back on a regular basis? JR.
I'm happy to talk about this since I feel like I've mentioned it the whole time with our committed volunteers who've been really supporting just the overall growth of our organization. For us, you know, it is a lot of decolonizing institutions in our community. And in order to do that, we have to stay really engaged with, like, civically engaged with what's happening with our on the city level, on the county level, and within our marginalized communities, engaging with what's going on and what people need. And so having individuals that continue to show up week after week helps build that sense of trust and community across racial lines and across identities, right? To be able to really engage and move forward the same mission of decolonizing institutions and engaging in a sense of community and joy and liberation. We wouldn't be able to do that work without these individuals. And most of our volunteers are rooted in like a skilled volunteerism aspect where, you know, we've been able to engage with folks who have a broad background in grant writing. I am not a grant writer, but now I have learned with a lot of support from volunteers how to write grants in order for us to stay functioning as an organization, right? And so these volunteers can come into this space and provide this expertise for us, and not necessarily provide it, but work with us. Like, they're working with us to teach us how to do it, not just do it for us or like tell us how it's done. It's more like, this is how we want it to be. How do we make our intentions fit with the way that this structured grant application wants us to show up, right? And so really meeting in the middle to make success, to progress, to move forward, which is really great. And then some other areas where we're evolving is creating designated like volunteer teams that would meet regularly to advance certain needs in our community. For example, I'm in the process of developing a local government accountability team, which would all be volunteers, right? And so these are volunteers that can choose a type of local government they'd like to monitor, be engaged with, or check in on. And the beauty of that as a multiracial volunteer opportunity is all the diverse perspectives you would get when it comes to listening into a city council meeting, to reading your city budget documents, right? Like, one individual's interpretation will be different than another's. And so for the opportunity to have all these people engage in an area in which they love, to then come back together to discuss, talk about it, recognize the varying areas, and then be able to report out to the overall community. Some of the areas where I'm aiming to create like volunteer networks is around our city budget, around city council and our commissions, and the PSD school board. So there's a variety of ways in which we want to engage with our elected officials, especially as we are in a primary election year right now. And then for us too, using our Slack network is really being able to, and Slack is an app where you're able to like communicate with individuals. It's not so much a social network, but another communication tool. And by recruiting more individuals that are in line with our mission, or those who want to support our mission, it's a great way for us to share immediate calls to action. So if there's an immediate need or like a quick opportunity to volunteer, or an ask that even comes from another organization, we're able to share that with our broad audience of individuals to say like, hey, this is going on. Are you able to help? Did you know about this? Or save and plan for this. So that network has helped us kind of avoid some of the noise that is already in a lot of social media. I mean, we talked about potentially using like a Facebook group, but I think, as we all know, with social media today, there's just a lot of noise there. So how can we make it a little more exclusive? And exclusive isn't the right word, right? It's more engaged is probably the word that I'm looking for. How do we make it a more engaged opportunity for volunteers to connect and feel part of our movement? And because that is who we are, and what we want to do is make this a community movement, and keeping everyone together while building a sense of community at the same time.
Absolutely. Thank you, JR. Joe.
Yeah, so recurring volunteerism is very important for CASA. CASA can't be successful with their mission without it. As Blake was talking about a bit earlier, we work with kids who are experiencing or have experienced abuse and or neglect, which starts a legal process, which typically lasts for about a year to a year and a half. It could be more or less. So these are kids that are usually taken from their home, typically moving from one placement to another several times, get a new caseworker here and there or attorney. They just don't have stability, and they don't have many or any people that they can rely on and trust, which is really what they need with what they're going through. So CASA is asked to their volunteers is to be able to provide that stability and continuity for the children and commit to whatever the duration of that case is going to be. And we can't be successful and we can't help these children without it.
Thank you, Joe. Courtney.
So I think you touched on a really special point where when you dive deeper in like a role that you're doing, the accountability, responsibility, and transformation that happens is immense, right? And a lot of us hesitate, myself included, with like a 3-year mentorship program, or to be a CASA is a huge responsibility. Oftentimes you see volunteers like, I don't have children yet, but I'm committing to a child and to a life that I don't know in my daily life. And there's that accountability and change there. So that alone, I think, is transformative rather than that one touch, opportunity. And sometimes that starts with the one touch and then it transforms, right? Perhaps you come to bag onions and all of a sudden you find yourself leading the Saturday morning shift every, other Saturday. And that's really how those baby steps start. I want to speak specifically from the corporate perspective. I don't know if anyone on the line is business owners or on the business side, but I really believe when you're thinking about your volunteer program, there's lots of ways to start. There's lots of ways to grow that program. But if you think about the difference between a singular day of service, where most likely someone like my role or someone at the top is indicating where that day of service is going to happen, how many people are going to be there, what you're doing, versus having even a small start of like 4 hours of paid volunteer time or 8 hours versus the 24 that we provide our employees, where they can go explore the desires of their own hearts, the interests of their own minds, and they could give an hour to a lot of different nonprofits until they have that touch point where all of a sudden they're like, yes, this is my heart's calling. The opportunity for transformation and change to me is much more immense than that singular day. It doesn't mean that those singular days can't be transformative. And as Blake alluded to, we have one of those days each year, but that is only one day, and that is part of our comprehensive giving back program. So for me, from a business perspective, if you're thinking about starting a volunteer program or ways to increase that, I really encourage you to think about the meaning behind it, to meet organizations where their need is, not to create opportunities that benefit your employees and everything they want to do, right? Which is often days of service, which I'm guilty of a little bit with our day of service. Although we really try to say, please give us a project that is already in need of yours. So our employees will mainly be doing weeding and scraping off gum from buses for PSD and a lot of other things that have been put to the side because that's what our organizations need. And so I really think for long-term systemic change, you have to provide opportunities for people to go explore and understand what matters to them, because that's when that changes. We all know if you're lit up, whether it's a job and a relationship and a volunteer experience, and if you're lit up and plugged in because of who you uniquely are, that's going to be when that light bulb turns on and stays on. And so that's what I really implore businesses to think about. And then from the nonprofit side, think about, and I know it's tough because there's only one of you and you're usually doing 7 different things, but think about your whole calendar year and think, what are these big opportunities where I need pieces, and what are the opportunities that are sort of ongoing, and how can I build a relationship with Courtney, for example, to understand how to best leverage her people power for the things where I need them the most, right? And it's about that strategic conversation that really takes it to the 2.0 level, and that takes time to build. But if you come to an employer with a request, think about where and when does that need to happen, and look at the long view so you can build up towards those opportunities together, would be my recommendation.
Thank you so much, Courtney. That speaks really well to the next question I was going to ask you all. And that question is, what would you all say to someone who is interested in getting involved in volunteering on a regular basis, but they don't know where to start? Or from the other perspective, what would you say to a company that, is interested in maybe offering volunteer time off, or interested in moving beyond the one-off volunteer project, but they're feeling overwhelmed and also don't know what to start? What would you all say? What advice do you have? Kimberly?
That's a great question. Thank you. And of course, what Courtney mentioned is just right on point, as usual. But it's true. So having 4 different locations, each one is a little bit different. So for example, like our food share in Loveland, that's kind of different from our one in Fort Collins. You have 2 different populations there. When you're at Right Drive and you're working in the community kitchen and you're making meals for Meals on Wheels or the Kids Cafe feeding program. So I always try to encourage volunteers, if they can, to try the different sites. If they've been to one, try the different sites, because just like she said, you may find one just sits with you differently. I had one gentleman that when his father was homebound across the country with COVID and he couldn't see him, he wanted to come in and build the senior boxes, and the senior boxes give a box of food that helps a senior survive for a month. And so for him, that was his way of doing something to help another person in a role like his father. He was very passionate about that. So by going to the different locations, trying different parts, you can see what triggers for you. Like for some people, they were retired teachers. So being able to still connect with children and feeding them meant the world to them. So I always mention, I try to push people outside their comfort zones, even if it may be a bit of a trip. Please go try this different location, as well as the other organizations that we have in our community that also need help. I think volunteering in general fills you up. I think you really get more back than even what you give. What you give is essential. Like for us, our volunteers came out to 29 full-time equivalent employees, which is over half of what our current staff level is. So there's no way we could have survived and kept providing food to all of our clients without them. But yet there is something about how enriched your life becomes when you can actually do something positive in a world that can seem chaotic and unfair. When you can actually do something good and you can directly see that you help someone, it's amazing how much that can build you up. So I would just say, like Courtney said, take a first try, and then try different locations, try different organizations. And then like what we have learned is creating more roles and trusting our volunteers, that they come from many different backgrounds and they have many different skills. And if you trust them more, allow them to do more things, it's amazing to see how much more engaged they'll be and how you can just see them kind of shine. So that's something we've definitely been working on as well, to support our volunteers.
Thanks, Kimberly. I love that also from the nonprofit perspective, and thinking about, what can nonprofits do to support engagement and extending that trust and creating roles that that really align with volunteers' interests and skill sets, as well as the nonprofit's needs. That is also a really great way to engage volunteers. Blake.
Just to slightly piggyback, I think it's, kind of as an individual that may be interested in volunteering or getting involved and not knowing where to start. I think, first of all, there's organizations like the United Way that have a lot of information and a lot of resources, so you can do a little bit of one-stop shopping in terms of learning kind of where your passion is, and then reaching out to those organizations. I mean, I get excited when my phone rings or my email goes off and there's someone who's just looking for, information. And we know as volunteer, engagement people that you may give them all the information they need and they may say like, that's great, but I don't think that that's a great fit. And we recognize that and we just appreciate that interest. And if we can get you plugged in somewhere else, we're happy to do that because like you said, there's so many needs in our community, so many opportunities to give back. So we want you to find that place where you can feel like you can hang your hat for a little bit. But also it's a little bit what Kimberly said, is willing to step out of your comfort zone, or not being intimidated by like a heavy lift of like the commitment that our CASA volunteers or a regular standing shift. I think it's like anything in our life, if it's important and we put value in that, we can find ways to make that fit in our life. And that's, you know, as volunteer engagement person, I'm always trying to figure out that balance of it being, you know, fully disclosing the time commitment and the level of involvement that it takes to be a CASA, but also recognizing that, you know, we want it to work for you too. We want to work it in your life. So putting those layers of support where, you know, you can get the services, you know, and that kind of fill like your bucket, and so you can be a good CASA. So it's always kind of evaluating what we're asking our volunteers to do versus what we need them to do. And Courtney, you know, brought up the great point of finding meaningful opportunities to give back, and not, you know, if someone wants to do something, like have that conversation about, you know, if they can't do a work day just because of the logistics, maybe they can do a drive for something in particular that we are needing. So we really are crossing something off of our list of to-dos without kind of manufacturing something so you feel good. And it helped us a little bit. So, you know, I think just that communication piece becomes really important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Blake. I think we've got.
I put my
Courtney,
hand down. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, just to, again, thinking from the company perspective and feeling like it can be overwhelmed. I think employee engagement around creating a program is really important. So a lot of smaller companies or larger companies have employee community outreach committees. These are employees that have sort of opted in to research organizations, build relationships with organizations. They might be in charge of setting up a volunteer opportunity each month with these different partners, or at the very least, you know, polling or creating a survey for your employees to say, what are sort of these, here are some key areas we're looking at, what's most, you know, interesting to you, having your own volunteer time, us setting up a group opportunity, giving a community grant that, you know, you get to vote on every month. It's getting the buy-in from your employees, especially for it being an employee program, right? So leaning into your employees. And again, I'm really just fully committed to having options, right? So it is nice to have the different categories. We have an internet for our employees that has a landing page for a lot of things, but in particular, 12 different categories with all the local nonprofits for the most part listed under those categories. So employees can go right there and find those things under animals and then go to their website and do some self-exploration there. The last thing I'll say though that also works well and is sometimes an easier lift is think about what industry your company is in and think about cause areas on the nonprofit side that are connected. Obviously, if you produce food, you could deepen a great relationship with the food bank. You could do it with dollars, you can do it with your time, you can do it with sharing stories back and forth. And to build off what Blake's saying is we all know that each one of you as nonprofits have both your traditional volunteering needs, your special event needs, often your committee work needs, and things like we need a graphic designer or someone that can help with our website. Oftentimes I go to websites, and again, I know you're small but mighty teams. I've been there many times myself. It's just a list of like how you can engage and email this person if you're interested. There's not like this committee needs 3 more people. They meet this day at this time. It's 2 hours a month. So there's just too much space between the landing on the page and the getting someone to email you. So the more details you can provide around really high needs, especially that are coming up, I think is better. Obviously, some of you are able to do more forthright platforms for signing up volunteers that don't have a ton of barriers. But again, if a training is required, if you already have those planned, make those dates and times available. So I know right away, cool, I want to train to be an animal care coordinator at the Humane Society. I know that I have to attend this training on this date, and then these are kind of the shifts that are coming up. Just the more information, the better. But I think really just starting with employee engagement, listening to your employees, seeing what they're interested in, or at least doing some initial brainstorming and presenting that will be a great way to start from, you know, square one to getting to square two.
Thanks so much, Courtney, for those tips. And I really appreciate what you mentioned about seeing if companies can mobilize smaller groups within the company through employee resource groups, or if a company has a community impact team already, leveraging that group, right? Start small and build ambassadors within that group, and start with that. I think that's something that we've seen a lot of success with at United Way. I know OtterCares really demonstrates that as well, and I think that's a great tip. JR.
Thanks. I've loved hearing everyone's comments around volunteerism, and there is definitely data that shows as an individual, volunteerism can really help you as an individual. I personally believe, and the way that I was raised is that it's my responsibility to engage and support my community, regardless of what it may do for me. I've been a volunteer since birth, essentially, in a lot of areas, and it's our social responsibility to care for our fellow humans and our earth, and finding a way to love one another for the sake of humanity as well, regardless of any needs that or things that an individual is seeking to find to heal themselves too. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is that while yes, volunteerism is going to give an individual a sense of joy and connection, there's also that innate need for people to gather and help each other in order to survive and thrive and move forward. And so that may align with ways to volunteer and give back to your community to be able to have a thriving community as a whole, and not necessarily just what that individual may need for themselves. It is leaving your comfort zone. It is exploring new things. When I was younger, I definitely did use it as a resume builder, being able to use some of that skilled volunteerism to really try to explore and see this is where I wanted to go in the world. Other places are other opportunities, as well as like thinking about what are the talents that we as individuals have that could benefit another organization, right? So checking in and engaging with your own privilege and where it may stand and how you can use that to elevate and move forward other people in our community, other organizations, missions, and needs in our community at the same time. So there's a broad reason and a broad opportunity for everyone to get involved and give back to their community, whether it's for the self or whether it's for the community as a whole or the environment. And I think your original question was like, what would you tell someone to like get involved, right? What's like the first step is like, listen to your heart and soul of like where you think you can give back, right? Don't, sometimes I think, with some of those days of volunteer days, it feels like it could just be like, oh, I have to do this, versus like it's something genuinely coming from a soul and where you think moving forward could be. So I would listen internally as an individual of like where you want to see change in the world, or where you want to really engage and thrive, and lean into that feeling, that sense, and find other people that may be interested or doing the same things, and build that community yourself too. So I think there's a lot of opportunities and how to get involved in volunteerism based on who you are as an individual and what talents and passions you have.
Thank you so much, JR. I think that was really well said. And we're seeing in the chat a lot of agreement, right? That it's not just about checking the box, right? It's so much more than that. And being curious about who we are and how we feel connected and thrive in the community, and how that can meet some really important needs in our community and help strengthen those ties, right? It's all connected. This isn't happening in a vacuum. So what we'll do, we're in our last couple of minutes, we'll go to Joe, and then we'll go to final comments from the presenters. If anybody has any questions that they wanted to drop into the Q&A, we'll make sure that we try to cover those quickly as well. So Joe, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I love everything that JR just said. So tips on how to get involved, where to start, how to go about it. Just start with what you want. For me, I wanted to have a positive impact on our society. That could mean a million different things. So I thought about the skills that I can bring to a table, more specifically what I'd want to do. And for me, I wanted to try to help in mental health in one way or another. ran a Google search. I had never even heard of CASA at this point. Ran a Google search and I found a few things that might be able to fit what I was looking for. And then you just reach out. All of the people on this panel, we need volunteers. They want you to reach out. You can usually sign up through a website, or you can find somebody at one of the organization's contact informations. They would love to hear from you, like Blake said. I would love to hear from you if you wanted to be a CASA. So just put yourself out there, get information, and I think you'll be able to find quickly whether or not it's what you want. And I can tell you as a volunteer, it's extremely rewarding for me, the impact that I'm having on a kid's life, and thinking about the future impact that can have on our society.
Thank you so much, Joe. We appreciate that. So with that, in our last couple minutes, I'll open it up to panelists. If there's any last bit of information you'd like to share with participants, I will go ahead and drop links into the chat to each of these organizations and links to how you can get involved. So with that, I will kind of open floor to panelists for the last couple minutes while I grab these links.
I had a thought after we were talking, because I know that the other half of that question, that last question, was how businesses can get engaged or support their employees in terms of volunteering. Something I think would be really great for businesses to consider is how can you empower the individual on an individualistic perspective, right? And not necessarily making it so it has to be an all staff sort of engagement or a team staff engagement, but rather really empowering that individual to show up in one area that feels best for them. In some organizations, like some staff may not feel as comfortable engaging with everyone on staff to give back, right? Especially if it's a person of color in a predominantly white space, they may not necessarily feel that volunteering with their colleagues is the best way for them to build community or feel safe. And so instead, maybe it's more appropriate for that business to tap into what an individual needs or wants when it comes to community engagement. And with that said, I think that a really great way for folks to find a place that volunteer is to show up with any nonprofit or any organization or any movement that speaks to you, and listen and feel for what's happening, and then engage with the folks that are there and see where your expertise and talent can provide the most impact. I recognize Google is a really great resource in order to find a lot of things, especially if you are new in a community. However, Google, just like social media, does have a lot of those similar algorithms where it's not going to give you it's not going to deliver the number one thing for you either. So it's never going to replace those human connections and the innate desire as a human being to provide support to your community. So as a new individual in a community, yes, absolutely, Google search for events and things that are happening. But as you get more ingrained within a community, show up in new places that maybe you don't feel comfortable in, if it's something that you want to support, that you want to grow. And again, that cheesy quote I'm going to keep bringing back, if it aligns with the change that you want to see in your community.
Great. Thank you so much, JR. I think that's a great point to end on, as we are now at 1 o'clock. I just realized that the links I was going to post didn't really transfer over well to the chat. So look for a follow-up email from me with the links that have been provided from our panel participants. Thank you all so much for being here today, whether you're watching right in this moment or you're following up and watching later. We are so grateful for you and your interest and curiosity about how to give back and get involved in this community. Thank you so much. Have a great day.